is being recorded, yes.
Okay. Are there any declarations of interest on the panel? Okay. Our first item today is a mixed-use development located at 77 James Street North. The lead planner on the file is Mark Keller. Good afternoon, Mark. We're ready for your presentation. Please keep the presentation under 10 minutes, and we'll give you a signal if you overrun a little bit. Thanks.
Thanks, Vince. Am I clear for everyone?
Yep, you're clear for me, Mark.
And you can all see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks again. Again, my name's Mark Kaler. I'm a planner on the urban team reviewing this file. Application for 77 James Street North. It is a site plan application. It's a proposal for a mixed-use commercial residential development with 3 30-story towers and 1 24-story tower on a 9-story base building, 2,068 dwelling units, 3,067 square meters of commercial space, and 972 parking spaces. This is the location of this site. Many of you will know it. It's the city center mall. It's attached to Jackson Square. It's at the southwest corner of James Street North and York Boulevard. You can see First Ontario Center, Hamilton Public Library to the west, and James Street North kind of retail area to the east and north. Here's a view of the site from the corner of James Street North and York Boulevard. You can see the clock tower and the facades that go down both York Boulevard and James North. Here is the facade along James Street North. View of the site from York Boulevard. And this is a view of the site from the roof of Jackson Square. There's publicly accessible space there that allows you to cut through all the way over to Queen Street from Bay Street from James Street North. That's a view looking north. This is a view of the site, the adjacent development to the south. It's the Jackson Square Mall. You can see the staircase there leads up to the roof of Jackson Square. That public space I was just showing you. Directly to the west is Hamilton Central Library and the Hamilton Market. So you can see a view of that there, and then there's a entrance to the underground parking garage. This is a view of development directly to the east, James Street North. You can see the Lister Block, historic building, and then it's the William Thomas student residence, and just more of a retail corridor extending along James. And just a view looking north. The scale of James Street North kind of goes down to a more 3-story to a bit higher scale. You can see that view on this picture. Here's a top view of the site. You can see the 4 towers. The tower 1 is the 24-story tower, with the tower 2, 3, and 4 being 30 stories. The tower floor plates range from 846 to over 1,200 square meters for tower 3. And you can see it's all connected by a 9-story podium. The proponent will get into this a bit more. You can also see the a kind of landscaped area pedestrian connection on the south end of the site between the mall and the proposed building. There's a couple elevations. The first is a view from James Street North, the second from York Boulevard. So high-level policy environment, in the Urban Hamilton official plan, the urban structure, it's designated or identified as downtown urban growth center. And it's a designated downtown mixed use area So our downtown urban growth center is the preeminent node in Hamilton. So it's intended to have higher scale density and a range of uses. But it's also a residential neighborhood, so it should have a large population of residents with a range of housing types available. And in terms of the designation, downtown mixed-use area, it's a central focus for the city, looking for higher, denser forms of housing and a mix of uses on site and throughout the downtown area. In terms of urban design, there's policies related to respecting existing character, development, built form, and landscapes, promoting quality design, contributing to the character and ambience of the community, massing development to respect existing street proportions, and reducing impact on neighboring buildings, and creating a comfortable pedestrian environment. This site's within our downtown Hamilton secondary plan area and is designated downtown mixed use pedestrian focus. And it's also identified as allowing a high-rise development. So it has a high-rise 2 designation on the building heights map. So major policy themes from the Hamilton secondary plan, just adding to what's in the parent plan. For the downtown mixed-use pedestrian focus designation, we're looking for building base heights and articulation of facades that retain that traditional rhythm and scale of the street along James Street North in particular. Tall buildings should be stepped back from the street to avoid interference with the perceived massing of the street as a low to mid-rise corridor. For high and tall buildings, the policies, there's the policy that no new tall buildings exceed the height of the top of the escarpment. They're also looking for a building base that fits harmoniously with adjacent street wall and mitigates sun and shadow impacts, as well as policies related to separation between towers on site and from adjacent property lines to protect development potential on other sites, but also to provide for sun access, sky views, and help with wind and sun impacts. And finally, just to highlight that tall buildings will be evaluated using the Downtown Hamilton Tall Buildings Guidelines, which I'll get to in a bit later in the presentation. For urban design policies, the development shall provide for transition and scale using a variety of methods that could include angular planes, orientation of buildings, and step backs and setbacks in the building mass. There is direction in the secondary plan to allow a minimum 3 hours of sun coverage between 10 and 4 on March 21st and September 21st on public sidewalks and other amenity areas. There's direction related to tower tops that they should be designed so they're recognizable landmark and contribute to a distinctive skyline. The views of Niagara Escarpment are an important factor, and just related to this site, James Street North is identified as a view corridor to the Niagara Escarpment. So there will be a visual impact assessment component to the review of this application. And just to highlight, there is, in the secondary plan, it does contemplate a design plan for the Jackson Square complex that includes, it's referred to as the former Eaton store, which is the city center mall, just to, in the future, improve pedestrian cycling amenities and examine opportunities to reintroduce or replicate the historic grid pattern that existed in this block. For the zoning bylaw, it's zoned D2, which is the downtown prime retail streets. There's further direction in the zoning related to building height. There's a maximum height of 89 meters. The building base facade heights, the requirement is 60 meters on James Street North and 18.5 meters on above the building base. There's a requirement for a 3-meter step back from the street. And then there's 12.5-meter required step backs for the tower portions, any portion exceeding 44 meters from any lot line, and then for buildings on site, when the towers are greater than 44 meters in height, there's a 25-meter separation required between the. And then one more regulation to highlight: the minimum 60% of the ground floor facade and 25 to 40% of the second and third story facades are required to be glazing.
Sorry, Mark, you're pretty quiet on my end.
Okay, am I
Oh,
better?
that's better. Yes.
Okay, and this is just highlighting some of the key guidelines from the Downtown Hamilton Tall Building Guidelines. So a lot of this is kind of covered in the official plan and zoning. You can see the various step backs, separation distances, the requirement to reduce shadow and wind. A couple other guidelines: the maximum floor plate size for residential tower, the guideline is 750 square meters. Where a larger floor plate is proposed, it would only be contemplated where all other guidelines can be met. Another guideline is for the building faces along a public street, they should not be longer than 70 meters without a physical break. And for facades greater than 40 meters, the idea is to break up the perceived mass with articulation, changes in materials, or other strategies. So these are the three questions I'd like to bring to the panel. The first is, does the proposal promote intensification that makes appropriate and innovative use of buildings and sites, and is compatible in form and function to the character of existing communities and neighborhoods? Secondly, does the proposal organize space in a logical manner through the design, placement, and construction of new buildings, streets, structures, and landscaping? And finally, does the proposal demonstrate sensitivity towards community identity through an understanding of the character of a place, context, and setting? And happy to answer any questions now or after the second presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We're ready for the applicant to make a presentation unless the committee members have a question for Mark. No? Great. Okay, so please introduce yourself and away you go.
Okay, so thanks everybody. My name is Mark Vilmer from SRM Architects, and we're going to start with a brief introduction by David Folletta from Bosefields. I'm just going to share our presentation here on the screen. Bear with us, please. I believe you can see the presentation now.
Yes, yep, it's up.
Okay. So in terms of the presenters, David Folletta will do a brief introduction. I'll do a little less brief, but still brief. And afterwards, Carl Paslow will address some of the heritage components. And then after we got we'll take questions.
Okay, can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so again, my name is, and I'm a registered professional planner with Bosefields. We're the planning consultant on the file. And, you know, rather than go through and, you know, restate things that Mark has already done, I won't do that. Mark's done a really good job sort of outlining the key policies of the secondary plan. I do just want to highlight a couple of the key themes. I think this panel recognizes that the Downtown Hamilton Secondary Plan is a new document. It was recently approved, and it's sort of the second edition of that Downtown Secondary Plan. The original one was in 2001. So you think about the changes that are and have been occurring over the downtown core since 2001. You can see that the previous plan did start to set those sort of structuring elements. The new plan sort of takes it one step further and really starts the next iteration of the downtown and introducing taller buildings into the context. And since the realization of that secondary plan, there's been a number of new buildings that have been not only proposed, but approved in the downtown core. So it's obviously an exciting time, and the city is really starting to introduce and change the, you know, the landscape of the downtown, if you will. So some of the key elements that Mark touched on, I do want to reinforce. I think the new secondary plan really talks about introducing residential as a key component of the downtown's revitalization. And I think that this proposal does that. The other thing is the public realm and how we treat the public realm. You saw from the views and photos that Mark sent that the current building that's there today really doesn't activate and doesn't respond to the surrounding streets. And what this proposal is meant to do is it's meant to implement the new secondary plan and really animate and enliven the street with an informed building. The other thing it does is it really starts to provide a range of housing typologies and create that sense of place in the downtown core by intensifying at a rate and an optimization that's envisioned by provincial policy, given that this site is in the downtown urban growth center and it's sort of in the city. So I'm going to sort of leave it at that. I think the other thing is sort of the new commercial amenities that this development will bring, and this would be a great place to live when you think about all of the existing employment and all of the existing entertainment and commercial facilities in the area. It really represents an opportunity to implement the vision of the downtown. And you'll find after Mark goes through his presentation on the details of how the proposal does this, that it's been generally designed in line with the secondary plan, the downtown tall building guidelines, and more specifically the zoning bylaw. So I'll pass it over to Mark and then we'll answer some questions when we're finished. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, David. So, okay, well, as you know, it's a hybrid tower and podium design. MIT's development consisting of 4 towers. 3 of the 4 towers are the same height, 30 stories, and you have a 24-story tower. Touching on what David talked about, the typology of different units. Of the 2,000 units, 2,068 units, we have 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, some 3 bedroom units, and we have live work units on the ground floor. The GFA of the development is roughly 1.7 million square feet, and we're currently looking at roughly 3,067 square meters of commercial area facing James Street and York Boulevard. So Tower 1, seen from the northeast, that's the 24-story tower, and this tower has been dropped down in height to respect the developments across as you scale up towards development to transition up towards the site. So this is a view from the development of, this is from the east, looking east from Rebecca Street of the development. Significant attention has been given to articulating the building design, particularly along the base. So the podium's been designed to facilitate an interactive and convertible frontage, both along James Street and York Street. You'll also notice along the entire base of the building, the podium, the lower level, there's a sculptural feature that wraps the podium base. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. Here you can see the development corner features, a prominent commercial space. Again, at grade, it's all either commercial or live work units, with the public commercial aspects of those live work units facing outwards towards James Street and York Boulevard. The development's adjacent to Jackson Square, and that's along James Street. As Mark initially showed those stairs going up to that roof area, that public space, well, what we've done is we've created a further extension of King Williams. So it's an implied extension of King Williams at this time, and it facilitates further redevelopment on the Jackson Square site. What we've done is we've actually created a pedestrian street, and that's a way where we want to effectively create a laneway, pedestrian laneway, to further activate the frontage wrapping around that site for more live work units and commercial opportunities along the grade. And all of this, of course, is done because James Street is a prime retail, and we're trying to augment the activity there because right now it's underserved. The podium face proposed tight to the straight line, and that's to allow, we can align it with adjacent developments, and we're trying to correlate our podium articulation height with what's happening across the street, whether it be York or James Street. So we've raised that height up. Previously, the initial design was only 2 stories, so now we've gone up to 5 stories, and it varies around articulating so we can match what's happening across the streets. Retail spaces at grade with significant overhead space are proposed. And so that gives us the ability to have these live-work units that are effectively a mezzanine space. It gives us, we can take advantage of pedestrian activity, draw in customers, personal business establishments, while the private living quarters are isolated behind more public spaces within these unique mezzanine spaces. That is in addition to just the standard retail space we'll be providing. For the street, activating is achieved by the second floor. So that's along James Street in York. Their program is internal amenity spaces for the development. This sculptural screen you see here, it acts as a bridge between what's happening at level 1 and level 2. And you can see between in these gaps, you can see there's actual openings. You're seeing activity, whether it's gyms, saunas, these fun activity spaces. And then behind all of that is actually parking, because the parking is going below grade and above grade. And this is a way to increase efficiency of the development while at the same time preserving a very nice aesthetic from the exterior. I'm just going to show a couple of views. Now I'll focus in on at nighttime. We spent some time to give the towers prominent wayfinding. So each tower, so for example, the entrances are meant to break those commercial attributes that are happening. So on one side, you'll have commercial activity. You'll have a significant feature for your entrance for towers 1, 2, 3, and 4. So for example, tower number 1 entrance can be seen facing York Boulevard. Here you see tower 2, that's facing James Street. Tower entrance number 3 seen facing James Street as well. And you have tower number 4 here, and that's facing York Boulevard. At night, one of the ideas right now is at night the development can evolve to create a different perceived form and shape. And this is some of the tower footprints are large, and what we're doing is we're coming up with creative architectural ways to break up that massing, both at daytime and at nighttime. So the diagrams on the right are just indicating the massing as we did preliminary massing to work out where the towers should be located on the site to mitigate shadowing impacts on the adjacent neighborhood. And that ultimately became one of the primary functions of or results of where the towers are and how big they are and how they're separated from each other. Right now, we are in all cases respecting 25-meter tower to tower separation, 12.5 meters to property lines. The bigger challenge became shadowing along York, and that's what this design's been able to achieve, as Mark alluded to earlier, 3 hours of daylight between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. At the spring and fall equinox. And so again, here we're showing different views, specifically here looking southwest from James Street, as you see the developments in the evenings. And here we have a view looking southwest from James Street North. You can catch the primary entrance. Well, I should say it's a primary retail entrance for the residential towers. And here, this is an interesting view looking west from Rebecca Street. And so there's actually going to be buildings in the foreground. So for the purpose of conveying the design intent, we've ghosted those in. So we're looking through some buildings here. The reality is you wouldn't see the full development from that point. So I suppose we don't have to go over the site plan too much. As you heard, maybe I'll draw attention to the fact that this is the link along the southern end of the site. That's Jackson Square. And what we've done is across James Street, you have King William. We've created a new pedestrian realm that's an extension. So it's a physical break between our development and the adjacent development. Today, that break exists only going up steep stairs and rooftop terrace. And now we've actually been able to do that at grade. And this facilitates future redevelopment on the adjacent site, but also in the interim, it actually is a very interesting and unique space for more commercial opportunities as well as amenity and live work units. So the development consists of 2 full levels of underground parking and 1 level of above ground parking. So right now you're looking at the lowest level of parking. And presently with Hamilton City Center, there's this large loading dock area. And so as part of our solution, we've actually been able to find some efficiencies with what's been done already in terms of spatial relationships between all the areas. And so we're using a similar design as what's currently built on site for a loading and garbage collection, all happening at the lowest level of the development. And this provides ample space for trucks to come in, full turn, back up, turnarounds, while at the same time we have a full level underground parking for P2. And I'm going to come up one more level here. So that would be the ramp that would continue down to P2, but you can get off the ramp earlier, and now you have level P1, which is still fully below grade. And this is more traditional below grade parking with the 4 cores of the development shown and storage room and mechanical spaces. Level 1, this is a bit more interesting. So you see the gray areas, concealed parking. We have commercial opportunities along James Street and wrapping around York. And then we have these hybrid spaces, which are live work flex spaces where they can be residential, they could be commercial. There's a bit of a marriage happening between some functions there. You'll see the tower number 4, how the core comes down effectively in the middle of the site, and then we're able to connect out so that we can have undisturbed access for unique entrances to each development building. This is level 2. Again, this is the parking area that we showed that you can't see from the renderings because we're screening the entire area through this these spaces here, and these are going to be interior amenity areas programmed. As you saw previously, the elevation, so I suppose we don't need to go into this too much. Here's that scene from York. We've broken out the individual buildings elevations, and those are part of your package for your own review. So we'll go into that too much, just to not take up too much time here. I suppose it's worth noting to combat some of the larger footprints of the towers, we're using some architectural styles here to break up the mass. And so these buildings are effectively going to be glazed, largely glazed with wraparound balconies. We've provided analysis, and these are a series of street section diagrams, and these are what we use to inform our own podium. So that would be across the street and what's actually on our street. So at the top, this page here refers to podium relationships across the street to James, and then this one here relates to York Boulevard. Won't go into the full shadow study. I suppose I'm just going to go right to the end. This is a composite that painstakingly put together, looking at various tower locations. Again, this site plan is showing 4 towers on the site in very specific locations that allow us to have the maximum tower to tower separation, as well as trying to mitigate and minimize shadowing. And this diagram demonstrates that we comply along York Street in the public realm in terms of where our shadow is impacted, so that we can provide 3 hours of daylight in the worst hit area, which is York. And part of the challenge here is it's a narrow street and it's got an awkward bend, which further exacerbated the shadows that we were mitigating. We've also done internal shadow study for our interior courtyard. And what this is demonstrating is the red represents different sun coverage areas. And this to say that we have a large interior courtyard that we're going to design in coordination with our shadow impacts, so that we can provide quality outdoor space where we have abundance of daylight, and where we have less daylight, more ambient light would be a different type of programming. Here I'll pass it off to Carla. She'll talk about a little bit of the heritage impact assessment and some of their proposals for this development.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. And you can hear me, right?
Correct. Yes. Thank you.
Good. Thanks. All right. Parcel Heritage Consultancy was retained by SRM Architects on behalf of 77 James Street, Inc. to prepare a cultural heritage impact assessment for 77 James Street North, also known as the Hamilton City Centre Mall. Based on what we did, we had very limited work. So our review of the cultural heritage value for 77 North found that the current structure itself has not been evaluated to determine if it retains any cultural heritage value or interest. However, 3 heritage features, that were identified by the city and also identified by us, the clock bell, the Eaton sign, and the bronze frieze, appear to retain some kind of cultural heritage value or interest. So in our recommendations, we identify those 3 heritage features, and we recommend some kind of development strategy plan to provide guidance on how to remove, store, conserve, and reintegrate these 3 identified items, and also to include some kind of conservation treatments. We are also recommending that the new development design guidelines should also incorporate sympathetic massing, elevations, and building materials to the surrounding neighborhoods and streetscapes, and also to incorporate some sort of commemoration strategy for the public awareness of the former heritage properties that once were prevalent at this location. And this could include some kind of commemoration strategy that includes the Second City Hall clock tower, or the bronze and granite friezes, as well as the Eaton sign.
Okay.
Thank you.
Carla. That transitions really quickly, and I'm almost done here, Victoria, with this ribbon feature. And one of our ideas is the sculptural podium wraps the development, and the feature interconnects various tower entrances and weaves through the development. So the idea is that the glazing and aluminum panels, they're going to consist of color and shape abstracts from identified landmarks, and that's going to be things that we think are important from our perspective, as well as from a heritage and a cultural perspective. So it's not only going to be built forms and buildings, but Indigenous flags at City Hall. We want to capture the fabric of the city of Hamilton as an idea where we can generate an abstract and create a pattern. And so the contemplated design results in it's almost the DNA of the city of Hamilton. And the idea is it's a feature that can be experienced from a distance, but also when you're close up walking around the podium, because so much of our efforts on this development are to drastically upgrade the experience, the human experience, when you're walking along Hamilton, the sidewalks beside James Street and York Boulevard for this development.
Mark.
So that's we're going to have a lot of tie-ins there with the heritage aspects.
Mark, it's Shannon here. We only have about 25 minutes left in this meeting, so, oh, you're done. Never mind. Sorry.
I'm done, yes. I appreciate that though, Shannon. I'd be happy to talk everyone's ear off for another hour, but I'm here to listen.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to questions from the panel to the proponent. So we'll start with James.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. Can someone please tell me what the length, the linear frontage of the streets, James Street and York Boulevard? And okay, while we're searching that, I mean, maybe it's a question for the designers. I mean, was there any other design approaches to this site when you were going through the evolution of your entirety? The secondary plan calls for an overall design plan for this portion of the former extension of Jackson Square, and I'm just wondering if you considered any other design alternative priority to maybe reestablishing the fine grid of the urban block fabric here, whether it's the extension of King William Street as a public thoroughfare or Rebecca Street.
So I'd be happy to answer. So other design strategies, most of the design strategies contemplated full build out on the entire site. Initially, an extension of King William was not contemplated. Only early on it was, but then we decided to revisit it because it made a lot of sense for this development. In terms of an extension of Rebecca Street, that was never contemplated, as it caused a major problem with the location of one of the development towers in the core, and the tower locations on the site have been dictated by the geometry of the site and the 25-meter tower setback that we're providing between any of the perpendicular faces. The biggest change, I think, the biggest design evolution is we previously had 5-tower scenario with smaller towers, but we were having a lot of challenges with the shadow and impacts of 5 towers versus 4 towers.
Can you help me understand it? When I look at the facade line along James Street, it seems to me that the predominant height of that podium is in the range of 9 stories. And tell me how you rationalize 9 stories when I look across the street, and it's quite varied, whether it's the Lister block at I think 8 or 9, and as you move up the street towards York Boulevard, it's an eclectic mix of smaller, fine-grained building with a lot of heritage elements. And I guess the follow-on question for that is how many of those existing buildings are either listed or designated? I did hear a comment that the materiality of the project was, to the extent possible, going to consider some of those heritage buildings and try and incorporate some of those heritage elements by way of material. So sorry, that's I guess a two-parter question. What's the rationale for the 9-story podium height, and what about the heritage buildings across the street, and how does that influence the podium?
Sure. Well, the first question I think I can answer. We articulate the heights of the podiums facing the street. What we did is we did analysis of what was across the street, whether it's James Street or York, to match those heights. You're actually very correct when you mentioned the 9-story podium, but that's the ultimate podium. That's the recess. We actually tier up. We aggregate up to 9 stories. So, for example, there's sections of the podium. There would be 2 stories, or 3 stories, 5 stories, depending on what's happening along the site. And then when you step even further back into the core of the development, then it jumps up to the ultimate 9 stories. And that was done to effectively respect a 45-degree angular plane when you tier in and you tier back up.
Sorry, can I add a couple of things, Mark?
Yeah,
James, I just want to add a couple of things to your earlier comments. The length of frontage along James Street North is about 160 meters, and then the length of frontage along York Boulevard is about 117 meters. So I know what you're getting at in terms of breaking up that solid mass. And when you actually take, zoom out and you look at the lot fabric, the real only extension is King William, and then there's a potential extension of McNabb, which I think you would probably easily recognize. And we looked at that as an opportunity, and I think what Mark's group has come up with is sort of giving about half of that right-of-way width, and with the potential to redevelop in the future, because. And that kind of aligns with the center line of King William. So there is an opportunity for that to become a public right of way eventually. And I don't think that Mark's plans are not contemplating that. In terms of the McNabb extension, it really is not an opportunity, and we looked at it in detail. And the reason it's not is because of all of the underground that's happening under the Jackson Square complex. And it would really require that whole block to sort of explode in order to realize that extension. So that and it all happens sort of off of these lands, and that's the reason why. And I know there might be an opportunity to sort of plan so that this building could potentially front on that. I just don't know the likelihood of that being realized. So just to clarify a couple of points.
I appreciate that, David. And I guess just one last point, James, just with respect to the podium. We were focused on the feel of the street, the human scale. So when you're experiencing the podium, whether you're on James or York, your experience of what's happening on either side of the street will be the same experience. Where we go to 9 stories is out of sight. You'd be walking along James Street. The 9-story portion of podiums are pulled back; they're tiered back. So they're not part of you would experience them from afar, but not part of the public realm of the development.
Okay. Last question. Just help me understand a little bit better the King William laneway with these live work units fronting on it. What's the quality of that space? I'm assuming it's not public space, it's private space. You're creating some sort of not a greenway. What are you putting in there to make the amenity and the ability of these units beneficial?
So that's interesting. It's a good question, and that's because originally it was contemplated we were going to put nothing but commercial down there. So it was actually pure public. And so in that green space, we're dealing with some grading challenges. So we're trying to create some tiered landscaped terraces. But effectively, it was envisioned as an extension of King William, series of cafes and restaurants, opportunistic geometry for good little restaurants for pedestrians. And so that was a very public area. Then we contemplated, well, what if we do some of that, but then we mix in some of the live work units where these are still rather public spaces. And what I mean by that, the front facing aspects of the unit is public. The rear access of the unit is the private portion. So you'd effectively have an office in front of your units. People from the street would be able to enter an office. Behind the office would be more of the private quarters of your unit, and then you have they are mezzanine units. You'd have your bedrooms and bathrooms upstairs. So that was the logic. But right now it's a very dynamic thing, and I need to say a lot of that has changed since COVID in terms of what's the market going to need and want in terms of public commercial spaces. And so we're trying to think very creative in terms of what can we create in terms of a flexible space.
Okay. So what's the width of that laneway?
12 meters, right? From a property line to a tower, and then that laneway here, we're 9 meters.
Okay. Okay, Vince, that's all. Thank you.
Jackie, if you got comments, please, questions, please.
I'm sorry, Vin, can I just for a sec listen? I'm sorry to cut in the line, but I have to leave at 2:30, and I would like to just be able to comment on this before I go.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So could I, just for clarity's sake, what I'm just going through the zoning information that's provided. What is this amount of density in fact actually allowed on this site?
So the way that,
or are you asking for variances and so on?
I can answer that. It's Mark from planning. So the way the downtown zoning is structured, there is a holding provision that requires any building higher than 44 meters to satisfy certain requirements: shadow, visual impact, transportation impact study, wind study. So to say it is permitted in terms of the height.
So it's not what you're saying is it not based on floor space ratios, right? They can basically, as long as there's an envelope that they meet, they can place as much as they can within that.
If they meet they meet the various criteria under the holding provision. There's no density number in the zoning. That's correct.
Right. And again, I guess going back to James's first comment, maybe to the architects, there doesn't seem to be an urban design analysis as part of this application or proposal. And so it's very difficult to understand the evolution of a design other than the positioning and heights of towers and the shadow, because most of your shadow studies look like actually significant portions of the street as well as the public space you're providing in the middle are in shadow, and your 2-3 hours is not really adequate, right? So I'm just wondering, it would have been helpful to see that evolution on a diagrammatic level to understand how you're coming. Is there anything?
Well, maybe I can say something before Mark jumps in.
I'm not even. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Dave or Mark, or
maybe I can just add a couple of things. I think
it's
in terms of the
question to the architects really regarding. Yeah. I'm here.
All right. I just wanted to clarify something before Mark responds. In terms of the policy test, it is 3 hours of sunlight on the public sidewalks between 10 and 4 on March 21st, just to clarify. And that's an actual policy policy test. So I just wanted to clarify what it actually was. It wasn't 3 or 4. That's specifically what it is. And I'll let Mark sort of talk about it, but it generally, he can talk about the design rationale.
Thank you, David. That's correct. So previous design iterations of development consisted of, we started off by looking at the tall building guidelines to make sure that we could get tower floor plates, the size that would work from a development standpoint, from a performance standpoint, but then looking at the tall building guidelines to see if we can meet 12.5 meter separations from our towers to lot lines, 25 meters tower to tower, adequate 3 meter step back from podium. And so those were the hard parameters, that determined the boxes. And then what we wanted to do is look at the design to see what configuration on the site would have the least shadowing impact. And because of how narrow some of these streets are and the angles, particularly along York, that really started to inform a lot of the decision making in terms of optimal tower location and placement to fit in with the development and the neighborhood context the most. So that's the main, I think you could say the main decision track was how can we fit in with the surrounding neighborhood, and that was the way that was achieved. Previously, it was 5 towers, and that allowed for some other options, except for it did create some other problems. And so we can provide that information. We have all that material prepared, so we can give you you can see the design process. And we've had some offline meetings with city staff to go over some different scenarios and some different ideas. And so what you're seeing here is a culmination of a lot of different parameters that we're trying to meet.
Okay, we got to move on here. Any other questions, Yasin? Hello? Hello?
I think he's maybe frozen, Vince.
Okay.
Closing off a little.
Sorry.
Can you unfreeze him? There he is.
Yeah.
We should just move on. I think he's gone.
Yasin, are you there?
Can you hear me?
I think we need to move on. I'm sorry, Yasin, we can't hear you even if you're talking. So
Yes, we can. I think we should try one more time. Victoria?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you try Yasin one more time?
I don't see him in this meeting anymore, unfortunately. So let's move on to Colin.
Well, we skipped Jackie, so.
No, Jackie's not here in this meeting.
Okay.
She couldn't join.
Okay. So
I have a question. Have you sat down and worked with the city on the submission, or did you submit it without consultation with staff? Did that come through?
I can hear you, Colin, but I can't hear anyone else right now. I don't know.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Have you sat down with city staff prior to making this submission to discuss what the opportunities and constraints are of the site, or was it submitted without consultation with city staff?
Yes, yeah, we met with city staff, I think 2 times to go over some different challenges, I think it's safe to say, and what was truly pieces that were very important to the city staff. So yes, we had 2 prior offline meetings before today's presentation.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and in fairness to Mark and Victoria and everybody who would have seen any of the material, this is a culmination of those discussions, and so we have not actually presented this material here to them.
That's it for me then.
Okay, we'll go to Utah. Is Utah here today?
Yes, I don't have further questions. I will reserve for comments.
Okay, thank you. Mario? Is Mario with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Mike, a
Any
quick question about the pedestrian way as well. How does that space terminate at the end? Is it just, would it be the wall of Jackson Square, or is there any, I assume there's no, is there contemplated potential connection there or something?
At this time, no, but I can tell you it's a very interesting condition because of grade. It actually is grading upwards. So it actually results in you being on the roof of Jackson Square. You make a left, but you get up to that, those stairs you saw at that grade. We take those stairs out the entire way up. So you effectively slope up to it.
Okay.
So it's not a dead end, I guess is a short way to answer that.
Okay. And I guess that leads into the second question about the relationship. So you're saying it's almost at the same level as that existing rooftop in Jackson Square, the pedestrian zone?
Correct. It ends up being at the same elevation at the end, the very end towards Jackson Square. That's correct.
Okay. Was there ever any consideration on trying to connect the two?
Not at this time. We certainly have that ability, but I imagine there would be a more complicated discussion given different ownership groups of the different lots.
That's it for me for questions.
Okay, thank you, Mario. Tim?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. Thanks, Vince. Actually, Colin asked one of them. I understand that you have allowed for the integration of some, I guess, professional office space at the mezzanine level in these live-work units potentially. I just wanted any thought been given to maybe a more significant office component and potentially an office building itself, or multiple floors of continuous business use, not just for professional office. Was that given any thought?
Oh.
So it's been contemplated, and we have the ability to provide it in terms of end user and if the market will bear. That's a different question, but I think if the market was there and there was the desire to bring a space for Class A office space, it can easily be integrated into our design. The point of the design is that it's very flexible, so that when we emerge out of this strange era we're in, the development is going to be very flexible to accommodate whatever users want to go in the building in addition to residential. Just further to that point, those live work units, another serious contemplation by the ownership group of this company or this project is that these live work units could just be micro office spaces for flex spaces, given the uncertainty of large offices with large gatherings of people. What's that going to look like? And so we're trying to build in a lot of different options here. And fortunately for us, given the location and the heights of the floors that we have a lot of flexibility to facilitate that.
Okay, my other question is, I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss this, because we did hear about from the heritage consultant about some of the features that might have been integrated into the development. The clock tower, that's gone, correct? In your concept, it's not, you haven't retained it anywhere, tried to integrate it in any way. Is that correct?
Well, that's true. We haven't represented it, but it's not our intention to not. What we're going to do is just further investigation and work required to figure out how to best implement it and where it would be. So as part of subsequent submissions, we're going to be addressing specifically the heritage component, how it functions and factors into the development. At this time, we haven't made a proposition on where it would be or not be. So we haven't contemplated just getting rid of everything at this point.
If I can add just a couple of things, I think it'll probably help clarify some of the questions. I think it's important to recognize the intent was originally to come to design review panel before a site plan application was made. And that was to occur back in, I believe, February or March. And we wanted to really get your input to help inform the design as it sort of proceeded. So there wasn't an opportunity to do that because of COVID. And then the other important factor was development charges go up on July 1st in downtown. So there was a real big push to get the site plan in before DCs went up. So recognizing that as the framework as to why certain elements of the proposal have not been fully thought through, I just think it's important to recognize those elements. So.
That's appreciated. Thank you, David. Yeah, I have no further questions.
Thanks, Tim. Tim, would you take the chair? Just got a few questions. What's the area of the site? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you, Vince.
Yeah, I have the answer here if you want me to chime in. So lot area is 14,322 square meters. 14,000.
And what's the building area?
The building area, so gross floor area for this development is 158,642 square meters. That's a gross floor area. That's excluding below grades, underground parking, that sort of thing.
So in square feet, what is that?
Gross floor area in square feet is 1.7 million.
And the site area in square feet is around
154,000 and change.
So you got an FSI somewhere around 11. It's still a gauge of density, right? Earlier in the presentation, you spoke to street network and heritage considerations relative to street networks. And the answer was that the study that you undertook only addressed the position of buildings relative to mitigating shadows and respecting the tall building setbacks. But there was no discussion on, when you speak to options that you looked at, did you present to the city options where you actually created a street grid, a historic, like a reflection of the historic, what was there previously in terms of streets and how you may have responded to that previous grid? Did you look at that as an option?
Schematically, early on, we looked at some scenarios like that, but the where we resolved it was trying to mimic, I don't want to say copy or mirror, but mimic the scale of developments across the street. But that's as far as we rationalize that in terms of the parameters that we were dealing with the developments.
Yeah, I'm trying to do this in a question, not in a comment, but maybe I'll save it for comments. Because one would expect that the development of this scale would have come to the committee or even to planning with a series of options, like a serious option study where you looked at volumetrics and how you would have handled trying to reflect some historical sense of what the urban space may have been like and how, in what way that may have influenced your solution, rather than a monolithic podium with, 5 towers popping out of it. So I guess this is more directed towards planning, I guess, in the sense that, this committee is sitting here now trying to evaluate this, and we start with a global perspective, and the global perspective we would have expected to see some options as a historical analysis that you have undertaken that sort of drove you to the scheme that you're at now, rather than simply a response to the urban design, tall buildings, and zoning. Because the the density is quite high, and the massing is massive. And in what way does that relate to what would have been there in previously? In what way would you have had introducing some kind of openings for previous streets? Because 160 meters of wall along James Street, when the guidelines speak to 40 meters with significant openings at 40 meters, and an opportunity to introduce a street to the site, whether or not you build underneath it or not, it's still at grade a street, where you could have generated a more of an urban solution than a large podium of that scale. I guess it's a comment, it's not a question, is it? But can you speak to that a little bit? I mean,
well, I can speak to, yeah. So previously we had two different scenarios. We had a scenario where the podium stopped at 2 stories, it stepped in substantially, and then went up. And so that speaks to the articulation of the podium. In terms of providing, particularly along James Street, a break in the podium, the only break that was initially contemplated at a point was a driveway access, when we were looking at potentially different user groups using the ground floor from a circulation perspective. We had not contemplated breaking the podium with an actual opening that went all the way up. And part of that has to do with tower locations and how the circulation works within them. So that scenario has not been explored, just because it contradicted what some of our desired outcomes were, but we can certainly explore it further.
Okay, in what way does your family-oriented units relate to the podium? Like in what way is the outdoor space accessible to, and like how are you handling family-oriented units? Is there any particular character or quality that you're doing that, considering that you're introducing to improve that or offer some kind of a relationship between that, the introduction of those types of units and what they might need versus typical apartments?
Sure, that's a great question. We have a lot of flexibility for family-style units, particularly on the podiums, and that's because the podiums themselves have been all pulled towards the street, and then they crumbled away from the street. That's away from James Street in York. So James is a good example where, starting on level 3, where you have residential, we have large outdoor terraces, but they're private terraces. And so you could have comfortable family living on a 3rd story, and then level 4, level 5, where you tier towards the interior of the developments. You have, again, additional large opportunities of common or non-common terracing. This is very different than when you get to the towers, where it's traditional apartments or condominium balcony considerations. And this is all to talk about facing the streets. Interior courtyards, those are large internal outdoor amenity spaces, which they're going to be used as common areas for all the residential suites. But in terms of family, those have been earmarked, particularly facing James and York, on the podium levels.
The building guidelines speak to 750 square meters as sort of a maximum plate size. What reason did you use to create larger floor plates?
So I suppose the simple answer to that is trying to make the development work using the smaller tower footprints challenge. We looked at 3, from a geometrics perspective, we looked at 3 main criteria: tower floor plate area, tower to tower separation, and tower to property line separation, and shadowing. And we prioritized tower to tower separation and mitigating shadow impacts. And so in prioritizing that, it grew some of the floor plates of the towers, particularly towers 3 and 4. But again, towers 3 and 4 are the ones that are more internalized into the site, and we have the narrow portions of the building outward facing towards the public. And so we felt that was an appropriate place to increase the density of the tower floor plate itself, and it's in a location of the site where it's mitigating adverse shadow impacts along the public realm along York Street. So that was the That's the direct reason.
But Mark, if you have smaller floor plates, your shadows are automatically more mitigated than what you have now. Would you agree with that?
I would, yes.
So a 1,200 square meter floor plate, did I hear that correctly? You have one tower with 1,200 square meters?
Correct. Yeah, tower number 3. It's again, those are the guidelines, and we feel we can still achieve a lot of we can achieve the desired intent of the project. You know, where we're mitigating the size, the tower sizes, where it's more visible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll end there. I think based on the information provided by city staff and the applicant, each panel member will now provide feedback and recommendations. So we'll start with James.
Sorry, just
thank you.
James, just before you start, we just have about 5. We can maybe get to 10 minutes, but we do have another item at 3. So I hate to rush it along, but
you know, thank you. Very good, very comprehensive presentation. I think you appreciate that this site represents an absolutely phenomenal canvas for urban renewal, reurbanization of the downtown core. You'll know today that the existing condition along Upper James Street is phenomenally undesirable, and I'm just not convinced that this proposal, in fact, is a marked improvement on what's there today. There's problems, I think, with the scaling of the podium, the interrelation with James Street. When I look at the massing from York Boulevard, the entire width of the site from James to McNabb is a solid mass. There isn't a glimmer of views through the property. It just has the feeling of it's overdeveloped. And I think it needs to go back to the drawing board. I think you need to start back at first principles, look at the extensions of some at-grade, doesn't have to be public streets, but look at some at-grade breaking up of that facade along James Street and potentially York Boulevard. Maybe it's slender towers to improve views through the site. But you know, at this point, I see sort of a significant opportunity to go back and revisit options and undertake what the site really demands, which is a comprehensive, you know, urban design study to evaluate all of these elements. I'm a bit disappointed on the heritage aspect because I really don't see any of those heritage features from James Street being carried into the development, whether it's building heights, building articulations, the very fine-grained, and I think designated or listed properties on the other side of the street. So it's in no way it's complementing the existing heritage character of the street. And then I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it to the other panel members to add their comments.
Thanks, James. Okay, Jackie?
Jackie's not here. We'll go to Colin.
I'm sorry, Colin.
Hello. Okay. So this is a exciting site in the heart of downtown. It's next to the city's bustling market, the Central Library, civics and arts districts. And so far what I see today, all of that opportunity has been squandered by what I see in front of me today. I hate to be so harsh, but really I was hoping that your presentation and answers today would provide with some additional clarity into the decisions, but I think it's really just crystallized my opinion here that you really haven't hit any of the marks on the proposal as it stands in front of us today. This is I would recommend a full go back to the drawing board and start over again. This is a site that should be led by an urban design exercise with architecture and landscape that follow on to that. You should be doing it hand in hand with the city. We should be hearing about streets, about boulevards, about plazas, about public spaces, about the response to these important civic spaces I mentioned. We have the city's premier farmers market right next door. We didn't hear one mention of that. I mean, that's a destination unto itself for a regional destination. To the city, you should quickly initiate a study that contemplates the demauling of this block, which will come. This is the first cog in that wheel. and work with this proponent to ensure that this development does not prevent any desirable changes in the future when the demoling will eventually occur for this block. What I see in front of me today, you're giving very little, if not anything, back to the city. This is just a take development. You've created a fortress that turns its back on the city and creates a kind of a walled courtyard for your residents in an effort to maximize the density on this site. And it's really not doing anything for the city, the broader city. Further, there's no mention of sustainability. Yes, we're in a crisis, a pandemic crisis, but the larger crisis is a climate change crisis that we're all facing. A development of this size on a block should be contemplating sustainability from the very beginning and how we consider embodied carbon, encourage people to get out of their cars, to live downtown. It's not going to just create these units. You have to go farther in 2020 and beyond, and there's no mention of that here. For this being, I understand, a rushed SBA submission to get ahead of the DC charges, little to no information about the public realm, and that's hugely disappointing on such a prominent site. That should have been the core of your presentation: the public realm, the response to the city, how you can bring life and energy back into this block. You're not improving it for what it is today. On the tall building guidelines, you can't cherry pick the tall building guidelines. You have floor plates at almost double the tall building guideline floor plate threshold. I don't really see any justifiable reason for that, so I would encourage the city to come out strongly against that. And I would want to encourage you as the proponents to look to regional precedents. There is amazing and great precedents happening for developments in the GTHA that are of a similar scale to this development. I know some of the Toronto ones best because that's the city that I practice in most frequently, but so I direct you to look. I think the Mirvish Village development in Bathurst and Bloor is the perfect precedent for you to look at. It's a different level of finish because we're getting different square foot rates here, but the urban design principles of that development is what you should be copying on this development. The site is almost the same scale, and it responds in a way that is meaningful to the city. It will be meaningful to the residents who live there and meaningful to the broader neighborhood. And that's not happening here, and it needs to happen on a site like this. Additionally, the other development I direct you towards is the Well, also in Toronto, is a similarly scaled site that responds very successfully to best practice urban design principles. And then a little bit further west, the city of Mississauga is undertaking a reimagining the mall study, which is considering demoling at several other major mall properties across the city. Some of those sites have sites similar to this scale. And again, we're seeing some best practice urban design principles applied to those sites that's very applicable to your site here. So I think you really need to go back to the drawing board and sit down with an urban designer if you don't have one on your team and rethink this whole thing, because it's really not doing anything for the city, and I think it's not going to be a great place to live for the residents as well. That's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Colin. We're just running short of time. We've got another meeting in another 15 minutes. So Tim, if you could, oh, sorry, Mario. Mario?
Yeah, thanks.
I also have Ute, sorry, to speak before Mario. She's next on the list.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, I missed you.
I will be very, very, very quick. I think this is primarily directed to Mark as you, the designer of the site. I think your main issue right now is the scale. The moment you get scale wrong, everything kind of has a ripple effect. So your podiums, your towers, your open space, your relationship to the street, everything is out of scale. And I think the challenge for you and your team will be to really get out of the mindset of having to mimic what the mall has been doing all these years and actually fixing what the mall did to the downtown. And to do that, you have to break the mall and to actually bring in the old fabric into that block. It may not be vehicular, but it has to be pedestrian friendly. It has to be accessible. And And the moment you do that, I think you will find a solution to many of the issues that we have been citing in this meeting. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Okay, Mario?
Yeah, sorry. I agree that I think the permeability into the site is hugely important. I think that's one of the biggest problems of the entire block between Jackson Square, the city center, Cops Coliseum. It's just one entire block that has no real permeability into it. The city block. It's and to continue with that, I think, is a mistake. You can see that with Jackson Square, they have this rooftop space that's completely abandoned, and it's the same thing. It's not very inviting. There's no permeability, even though there's stairs to it. No one would ever go to it. And I think if you were, this part of the question about where that pedestrian space ended, because if there was an opportunity to connect that space to a real meaningful, amenity space of this development, where maybe it would bring some life back to that other space. And I realize there's multiple property owners, and I think that a property like this is significant enough that it needs to be thought out more on a holistic level rather than just on the individual site. There's other very important buildings and uses around the site, as mentioned by Colin, I think you can't ignore. And the last thing is, I think the public realm, the streetscape, it's really important to make sure that there's enough soil volume and get trees. I know this is really fine grained stuff, but missed the mark on that one for the farmers market when they redid that. The streetscape is terrible, and we wouldn't want to see that continue all the way around. So that's it for me, Vince.
Thank you. Tim?
Thanks, Vince. I think everything really has been said, and I completely agree with everything my colleagues have said. This does need a complete rethink. And I won't go into any more specific comments than that, but I just want to maybe try to be helpful in terms of the right approach to this site. It is not a site, it is a block. It's a very large block in the heart of the city. It's multiple sites and really multiple site plan applications. I assume the build out of this site is at least a dozen years. In that time, the downtown plan will probably be amended again. The market for office and other uses will change. There needs to be an urban design master plan here that begins. It's very telling that we saw renderings before we saw a master plan for the block. That's what's needed within the framework of a precinct plan for this larger, mega block in the heart of the city. And so my comment also is to city staff, and I know they're tired of me saying, you got more work to do in the downtown, but that is the reality now with all this change and all this development pressure. Now you've done this great downtown plan, you've got to zoom in and look at this block if you haven't started already, and really come up with a master plan for how it's going to be transformed, because we all know the whole big mega block needs to be rethought. This is obviously a very key site now coming forward. There has to be collaboration to make whatever happens on this block work with the future of Jackson Square and everything else on the bigger block. So I just urge everyone to kind of get together and figure that out. There's a lot of big issues. It's not going to be quick, but you can put a framework in place, and then you can still start to develop, right? Because again, this is a multi-phase development over many years. So get the framework in place, and then focus on the first building or two and get the details of that right. And by the way, yeah, multiple sites, multiple buildings, multiple architectural styles, more respect for heritage, certainly respect for the tall building guidelines, easily fit 5 towers on this site with better impacts. Yeah, so totally different approach. Please consider what we're saying here, because this is not a block that can be messed up. It's going to have a ripple effect on the rest of the heart of the city. So I really urge everyone to kind of just find a whole new approach. Thank you.
Okay. In the interest of time, I'm only have one thing to say, and that's that this is not one mega block. It's probably two, possibly 3 streets. And I think as a starting point, that's where you should go and introduce some interesting streets and look at the ground plane, look at the public realm, and deal with your massing and shadows as you've done the master plan. And so we'll end there. I don't know if there's any need to repeat what we've said. Normally we do sum it up, but I think in this case, we have a meeting in exactly 7 minutes and some of us need a bit of a break. So if it's okay with you, we'll move forward, and thank you for your presentation, and thanks for the level of effort that you put into this. And we hope that we can see you again.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.